Hi, my name is Nora, and this is Kaylee and I's presentation on environmental art.
What is environmental art? By definition, it is a movement where artists who are inspired by nature or use it as a raw material in their own art. They try to transmit beauty and encourage people to take care of the environment itself. The most known form of environmental art is landscape paintings, but a lot of artists try to express ecological and bring climate change, pollution, and similar problems up for discussion through their artwork.
Okay, let's go through a quick history of environmental art. Nature has been subject matter in art for centuries. It goes all the way back to Paleolithic times when people would paint plants and animals, so it's been around for a long time, though often as the background and not as the main focus. During the Renaissance, art centered around biblical, mythological, and historical themes, and landscape paintings only emerged in about the 16th century and gained prominence in the late 18th century with Romanticism, when that emerged. Romanticism displayed the beauty and the wildness and the divine power of nature, which this heavily influenced the Hudson River School that came about around the same time. The naturalism movement began in the late 19th century and sought to show nature as accurately as possible. And around the same time, Impressionist landscape painting became popular when new portable painting equipment was developed. But they really focused on the energy and light and shadows in paintings instead of showing it as accurately as they possibly could. Landscape paintings have shown the deep connection artists have with their physical environment and just how important that can be to an artist. Later, Diane Burke and Alexis Rockman incorporated these issues into their own works, showing how industrialization has negatively affected our environment. And then later, Nils Udo in the mid-60s moved to the German countryside in Bavaria and began to perform his art outside. Once he started to do this, he saw how nature was endangered and became an environmental activist. In the late 1970s, Nixon passed legislation protecting the environment, and Earth Day was established on April 22nd. All of these kind of grew around the same awareness that climate change is happening and how important the environment is just to our lives and everything we depend on.
A lot of people have the question of what is environmental art really made of? There are many different types of forms of environmental art. Typically, they are in a gallery of photos, paintings, and all of that, but they can also exist in nature itself. The types of environmental art are land or earth art, eco art, and climate change art. That's just a few of the plethora of options people have. But land or earth art was popular in 1960 to 70s, and this is working with directly within the environment and using and manipulating natural elements that already exist in this space. Eco art is the main focus of the artist is to focus and convey issues about local and global environmental issues. Climate change art focuses on climate change and global warming specifically.
How did environmental art become so popular? Well, it is appealing because environmental degradation is something very present and pressing, and this art form explores our relationship with nature. It calls out some of the ecological issues in a way that draws attention, a lot of attention from the public, and at the root of it, it's just people who are trying to figure out different ways to express our relationship and connection and responsibility to the environment. Artists want to make art that works in harmony with the environment and complements nature without destroying it even further. Which a question that arises a lot in this type of work is if the art does not last forever, what significance does it really have? Well, the significance comes from just the active exploration of our relationship with nature and just working towards a better relationship. It's a step along the way. Also bringing awareness to this art form. Sometimes there's celebrities that have started to get involved with it and have even paid people to get certain artwork shown to them. Like Leonardo DiCaprio has done some of this.
Why did artists transition from canvases to the environment? Environmental art is still portrayed on canvases to this day, but a lot of artists did transition to using the actual environment as their canvas in a way. So in the 1960s and 70s, artists became frustrated with the limitations of indoor gallery spaces, and this led to them to venture outside and try something different. The rise of moving outdoors for art was in a response to the rise of minimalism and conceptual art that challenged traditional thinking, as we've seen in class. People started to backlash and have opinions on this new type of art. People started to think that they had a right to go see it in a gallery, and if they had to travel for it, that just wasn't fair to them. But artists didn't really care about this, but they did start to take pictures of their art and show their audiences their art that was out in a field or wherever they were working. Pictures itself were taken to show the process of the art in the final piece itself. It has a unique relationship with time. It is often temporary when using organic materials or created from natural processes like leaves, tides, and they don't last long. Others with more permanent materials like stone can exist in the landscape for a long time. Others require long-term processes to fully come to the intended existence, such as growing for months or even years. Environmental artworks are consistently changing and reflecting this change, just as the environment is consistently changing and easily susceptible to changes around us.
Some of the main artists of this movement are Agnes Dennis, Nils Udo, Andy Goldsworthy, and Diane Burko.
Out of the many artists who helped with this movement, Diane Burko was one of them. She's an American painter and photographer, and her goal of her artwork was to directly address climate change in her work. Her most known and famous works is The Melting of the Glaciers, the Columbia Glacier Lines of Recession. This was a painting she did, and this was from the Columbia Glaciers, and it shows the changes of the glacier in Antarctica over 25 years. So every few years, she would find out where the glacier receded to, and she'd paint a line on it. And this is one of her most famous paintings for climate change.
Nils Udo was one of the main artists who got this movement started. He was born in Germany and began his career making sculptures and photography in nature, which he would bring back into urban places for people to view them. His most well-known works are his nest sculptures, like the one in the upper right, which he describes as a reminder that Mother Nature is our home. The one in the upper right is called Clemson Clay Nest. It was a public land art installation in the Botanical Gardens at Clemson University in South Carolina. It was built in 2005 with the assistance from volunteers and used about 80 tons of pine logs. It was taken down after 2 years, and the mulched trees were used to fill in the hole, which completes the cycle of going back to nature. The raft is the piece on the bottom right. It was built in 2012 on the Creuse, which is a river in France, and it was taken down several years later. This was built from native chestnut trees and in the shape of a half maple leaf, which forms a whole leaf once reflected in the water.
Agnes Dennis was also another artist who really inspired it, and probably one of the most famous ones for her work Wheatfield. She was born in Hungary, and her goal as an artist was to connect with aesthetics and engagement with social political ideas. She became an artist because she was inspired by a plethora of things, a few of those things just being philosophy, mathematics, linguistics, and other fields. She also had a super deep connection and respect for our planet and the universe itself. Her most famous works are Tree Mountain and Wheatfield. Tree Mountain was a man-made mountain measuring about 420 meters long, 270 meters wide, and 38 meters high. She started this project where 11,000 trees would be planted by 11,000 people from all over the world. She took ancient earth patterns and tried to replicate it with this project so the ecosystem could go back to natural. That was her idea of this. Her other most famous artwork is probably Wheatfield. This took months of preparation, and in May of 1982, 2 acres of wheat were planted on a landfill in lower Manhattan. This took an immense amount of effort from her team to pull it off. This land used was worth $4.5 billion. She tried to show the message of how waste, world hunger, and ecological concerns are not taken seriously anymore. She described it as misplaced priorities. The harvest of all of this grain traveled to 28 cities around the whole world. And the seeds that were carried away by the people planted them in many parts of the globe, which was really cool by her.
A fourth artist that plays a big role in the environmental art movement is Andy Goldsworthy. He's born in the UK, and he sees nature as a co-author of his pieces. He likes to emphasize that humans are not separate from nature, but instead are very much part of nature. He builds sculptures out in the landscape using only elements that he can find there, that are naturally found there, like sticks and stones, rocks, leaves, sand, flowers, plants, water, snow, all of those, but often also a lot of just natural processes like flowing rivers and the tide, which make a lot of his work very temporary. And he uses these temporary objects to show that nothing is eternal, and we need to understand that and appreciate that. Everything is not going to last, but we appreciate it while it is. One of his most well-known works, and actually one that isn't temporary, is Storm King Wall. This is a 2,278-foot stone wall in the New York Hudson Valley. He built this from 1997 to 1998, and it's a wall that curves around and embraces trees that would normally have been cut down when building a wall, because trees, are in the way often. But he's showing the importance of working around nature. He has reshapen earth art and inspired many other artists to focus more directly on ecology.
One big question is, has environment art really impacted the environment at all in good or negative ways? There have been negative ways that has been impacted, but a lot of the time it does bring awareness to environmental and ecological issues. It does create discussions on how we interact with the environment and the impact we have on it. Diane Burko is a huge example of this and has implemented it in shows that humans have impacted the environment. Same with Agnes Dennis. She has impacted the environment by planting 11,000 trees and making a new home and ecosystem for a lot of animals that inhabit that place.